So thank you so much for coming today. My name is Dora. I'm the editor-in-chief of the CPoPP journal. And I'd like to begin just by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from where I live as an uninvited guest on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Others of you may be living on different territories across the country as we gather virtually today. And I just wanted to share a resource with you called nativeland.ca in case you are curious to learn more about the lands where you're living today. It's a resource where you can enter your postal code and learn more about where the traditional territories of the people, Indigenous peoples across North America and around the world, really. It's a very useful resource. The Algonquin were one of the first Indigenous nations that Champlain recorded as he traveled up the Kitchissippi, now known as the Ottawa River. And the Algonquin territory, I don't know if you can see it totally in the map here, but it's quite large and spans many acres of rivers, lakes, forests, and is home to many animals and creatures. But through the processes of colonization and disposition of lands and creation of the reserve system under the Indian Act, today there are 10 federally recognized communities made up of status members of the Algonquin Nation across Ontario and Quebec. And there's also many more communities made up of non-status members, both inside and outside of that traditional territory. And I invite you to learn more. I found an interesting site by Lynn Gell, who's a PhD and member of the Anishinaabe Nation, telling a little bit more about the history of this place. I'm privileged and grateful to be working here and working from home. And for those of us who are settlers like myself, I think it's important that we educate ourselves about the history and ongoing processes of colonization and structural racism that are present in our relationship with Indigenous peoples and the land. And as students in academia, I'm mindful of the way that academic research has often been done on Indigenous peoples and not with Indigenous peoples. And it's been a very extractive process. And one of the things that I was reminded of working on the journal last year was to be mindful and thinking about the voices and perspectives and sources that we privilege in our own writing and research. And I think that those are some of the things that I'm thinking about as I move forward in the process of working on the journal. So just to give you a brief overview of what we're going to be covering today, I'll introduce you to some of the members of the executive team who are here. We're going to go over the CPoPP peer review process, what the paper nomination and submission process looks like, what the different roles are of the associate editor, senior editors, and authors to be involved in the journal. And I have a guest, Lauren Kathryn Johnson, who is one of our authors from last year, who's going to join us in a little bit to share some of her thoughts of being involved in the journal and why you might want to join either as an author or as an editor, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So as I mentioned, my name is Dora and I'm the editor-in-chief, and I have a few other colleagues here today. Jenna Lemia, do you want to take off your mic and say a quick hello?
Yes, thanks, Dora. Hi, I'm Jenna. I'm the managing editor for this year. I'm new to the role, so it's also going to be a learning process for me, but I did in my previous work on a journal, so I do have some familiarity with the peer review process.
Thanks, Jenna. I think I also saw Michelle. Is she? Michelle, are you there? I thought I saw her join. Maybe she dropped her connection. We might come back to her. And Tyler,
Hi, everyone. My name is Tyler Andrade. I am the Communications and Events Manager with CPoPP. Previous to this role, I've worked in communications for the last 7 years for nonprofits. More, I guess, closely for the last 2 years with an international development organization as their communication specialist. So it's just like finding myself back at home in this role. But I am new to the editing process, and I'm looking forward to all of the learning from and with everyone on the executive team and those who will be joining us.
Thanks so much, Tyler. And I'll just mention as well that we also have our production manager, Michelle, she was on the call, but I think she might have dropped off. And our finance manager is David Cho. And in the coming weeks, we'll be sharing a little bit more about our team on social media, so you can get to know us. You can reach out to us anytime with questions. And yeah, we're looking forward to working with you. So just to give you a brief overview of the peer review process that CPoPP has, we kind of have a unique 3-stage process of reviewing student papers for publication. In the first stage, students act as associate editors, or AEs, to review the papers and help narrow down the selection through a preliminary review, which Jenna is going to discuss shortly. In the second stage, the selected papers that pass the first stage of review are sent to external review, and we have policy professionals and professors and experts in the field act as external reviewers to provide feedback on the papers before the executive committee makes the final selection of which papers will move forward for publication. In the past, we've had between 5 and 8 papers typically that get selected for publication. It kind of just depends on the year and how many submissions we get. And then in the third stage, our student senior editors work closely with the authors to incorporate and consolidate the feedback that they've received in the earlier stages to edit the piece and turn it into hopefully some of the really quality work that the journal is proud to share. I'd like to share with you a little high-level schedule, I guess, of what our production and editing timelines look like. So we're in September right now. We're doing our information session. We've just shared our call for papers today, and the call for associate editors is expected to come next week as well, which Jenna is going to discuss in a little bit. In October, we will make selections of the associate editors and begin the review process by anonymizing all the papers and making sure that they're ready for our associate editors to review. And in late November, the associate editors will meet and I should have said they will have time to review the papers once selected, and then meet in November to collaborate, share thoughts on the papers and help narrow down the selection. And then in December, we select the papers that will advance to external review. So authors will be notified at that point if their papers have made it to the second stage. And the external review process will kind of take place over December and January. And at the end of January, we'll finalize the external review and select the papers for publication. And at that point as well, we'll invite our senior editors to participate in a workshop where we can exchange and learn some tips that are going to help in the editing process, which is going to take place over the month of February, where senior editors will work closely with the authors to refine the papers and incorporate that feedback that I mentioned earlier. And then in March, the papers go through a copy editing process. So authors will still be involved at that stage to make sure that they have approval and final sign off on the copy editing before the production gets sent to the printers. And our production manager will also be managing the design and layout of the journal and those sorts of things. And then in April, we will have a launch event to celebrate the work of everyone who's contributed to the journal. Hopefully we'll see where we are, whether it's virtual or in person, but no matter what, it's going to be fun and a great opportunity to reflect on the process and celebrate the successes. So as I mentioned, the call for papers process is underway now, and we are accepting paper nominations from professors within the SPPA program, and also direct submissions from students in the SPPA. So you can submit any paper that you've written for courses from any of the graduate programs within the SPPA since May of last year that received a recommended grade of A or higher. And we would just ask that you remove personal identifying information to help us in the anonymization process, and include that information in your email instead. So things like your name and your program of study, the grade that you got, the professor, and the course code, and when it was originally submitted. And oh, I forgot to update this. The submission deadline is October 1st. And the submissions can be sent directly to myself at eic.cpop@gmail.com. So please ignore the September 30th date there. I'm so sorry about that. And now I'm going to pass it on to Jenna, who's going to discuss a little bit about our associate editors.
Okay, thanks so much, Dora. Yeah, so we will be sending out a call for associate editors later next week. And a little bit about the role, what it entails. You will be given a set of papers to review, and this is according to a standardized form of different criteria. So the specific areas that the editors will pay attention to include the topic, thesis and methodology, content, references. After that has been, I can speak a little bit more to that a little bit later. But after that, you will have a virtual editor meeting to discuss papers with the fellow associate editors and nominate papers to proceed to the next round of editing for external review. And you will also have the opportunity to become a senior editor in the second semester. So if you do want to become an associate editor, there will be a call, as I mentioned, later next week. And it's a very simple application process. So you do just have to send an email to me with a short writing sample and a short statement explaining your interest and experience regarding the role. And my email will be included in the information that gets sent out, but it is managingeditor.cpop@gmail.com. Awesome. So a little bit more about the role of the associate editor. So they are key actors in getting the review process started. So in the stage of the associate editor, you'll provide a general sense of quality, clarity, and relevance of the paper. The specific areas that you'll pay attention to include items such as, is the topic relevant and timely to Canadian policymaking? Is it clear and coherent? Does it use sound evidence to support the thesis? Does it use appropriate and accurate references? And the main objective is just to get a better sense of if you do recommend this paper to be considered for the CPoPP journal.
And I should mention as well that, we all recognize that when you submit a paper for your final term paper of the school year, that, it might not be your best work at that point because you're juggling all of your other class commitments and things. So if you want to make some touch-ups to your paper before you submit it, you're welcome to do that. But you should also know that, as Jenna mentioned, we're really looking for some of these bigger kind of overall questions about the paper and the nitty-gritties of the editing and things are something that we will work with authors on. So don't let that hold you back, I guess, in terms of thinking about the process. So as I mentioned, when we get to that third stage, if your paper does advance past the external review, you will get the chance to work with the senior editors. And so we do select, or we do offer associate editors the opportunity to continue in second semester as a senior editor. We will hold a workshop at the end of January where you can learn more about the editing process and share tips and exchange knowledge. And the senior editors will work with the selected authors to incorporate the feedback from the external review process and further refine the paper. I think I'm a little bit early actually, so I might skip just to this slide if that's okay, Jenna, and we can come back to the other one once Lauren joins in a few minutes.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll just share a little bit about benefits and why we can persuade you to become an associate editor or a senior editor later on. So there are 5 main benefits that have been included here, but I'm sure as you do continue with the process, you'll find so much more. But this is a great opportunity to develop new skills that you can apply to your own academic writing or transfer to professional policy settings. It will help you become familiar with the peer review process. So that's, for example, if you do want to have your own work published at a later date or interested in joining a journal committee later on, it's a great opportunity for an inside look into the process. The paper submitted will represent a significant number of policy issues and areas. So it's a great opportunity to branch out into different areas that you may be interested in or focus on areas that you already have some experience in. And also it's a good opportunity to meet people with similar interests and network, especially if you do continue later on as a senior editor, you'll be able to work a little bit closer with authors. And finally, although this is to be confirmed, there is a chance that editors will be credited for their work in this role through a professional skills certificate. So not determined, but I know it was available last year. We'll keep you updated on that.
Sorry, I couldn't get my unmute button off. I think that I think that's about all we wanted to cover. I realize I'm a little bit early actually, and I told Lauren not to join until closer to 12:30. So maybe what we can do in the interim is just jump into some of the questions. And once Lauren gets here, we can pivot over back to her if that sounds okay with everybody. Okay, great. So feel free to just raise your hand if you have a question, and then unmute yourself if you're willing to speak publicly. Thanks, Mackenzie. Go ahead.
Hey, Dora, and all. Thanks for organizing this presentation. So quick question, just out of curiosity for myself. How many, maybe last year, how many submissions did y'all receive? Because I know that you narrow it down to 5 to 8, depending on the submissions, but I'm just curious to know the interest level from a society perspective, what the interest level is for students to submit. So we could probably potentially help with that, or even just know for my own personal sake.
For sure, yeah. Last year we received, I think it was about 27 or 28 initial submissions. That included, there were a couple of authors who submitted more than one paper. So I should say as well that if you want to submit more than one, you're welcome to do so. Last year we had the caveat, and I think we will continue this year, that if you have more than one paper that's selected to go to the second stage, that you will have to make a choice at that point as to which paper you want to continue in the process, because we will only have one paper published per author to kind of spread out the love, I guess, in terms of who gets published. So last year, like I said, we had about 27 or 28. that were initially submitted. I believe there were 9 that went to external review, and then from that 5 were chosen for publication. Does that help answer?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mackenzie. Tyler.
Hi, thanks again, Dora. I see Lauren is joining us, but I'll make my question nice and short. I was hoping maybe you could just elaborate a little bit further for everyone on the call about the support, the additional support that we'll be providing in terms of the writing process. Like you did speak a little bit to it in terms of like not always having, the best work at the end of term, but can you just speak a little bit more to the logistics of how we will support students in terms of the writing process?
No, that's a really great question, Tyler. And I'm sure actually Lauren may be able to speak a little bit to this as well, because she was actually one of the authors that I worked with as a senior editor. But I think there's kind of a fine balance too between editors working with authors, because we want to make sure as the author of the work, that your voice is still coming through. It's your ideas. And as editors, we're really just there to help you, convey your ideas in the clearest way and most persuasive way possible, I guess. So I think for myself, at least as an editor, a lot of the things that I was looking for were things like, if I read through a paragraph, like, did I understand everything that was trying to be conveyed here? What kind of tips could I offer the author to help make it clearer? Thinking about the overall structure of the paper, does it have a good flow, and helping to think through, like, as a reader, this is how I, interpreted the flow of ideas, and maybe it would make more sense actually to think of this item that you have at the end, to put it at the beginning, or whatever the case is. But it's very much a conversation, I would say, between editors and authors to work together. There's always going to be little stylistic things too, but I think that ultimately those decisions are up to the author still, about, like I said, making sure that their voice still comes through. But yeah, Lauren, I will let Lauren speak a little bit more to it as well, of some of her takeaways from the process. I think depending on the feedback that comes from the external reviews, it can be a more intensive process or a less intensive process, depending on what the feedback is. Oh no, I think my participant thing is... Sorry, my screen is a little bit frozen.
Thanks, Dora.
Okay, great. I might pause the questions for now, because you mentioned that Lauren did join. Oh no, I can't see my participant list.
I'm here, Dora.
You're here. Okay, awesome, Lauren. Thank you. I just wanted to introduce Lauren Kathryn Johnson. She is a graduate of the Sustainable Energy Program within the SPPA, and she was one of our published authors from the 2021 issue of CPoPP. Her paper was called "Of Kale and Caribou Towards a Coherent Food Security Mix for Nunavut." And Lauren, I'd like to invite you to tell us a little bit about what your paper was and why you chose the topic.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, you all. So as Dora said, my paper was about food security. I'm from the United States, and before I came to Canada, my career was largely in food and in food security in particular. And so even though I was doing the Sustainable Energy Policy Program, I just wanted to kind of learn about the food scene in Canada and kind of look at what the policy mix was in Canada, really just for my own personal interest. And so I decided to focus on food security. And when you talk about food security in Canada, kind of the meatiest, most difficult topic with that is obviously in the north, because it's so challenging to get food up there. And there's so much history. So I kind of wrote this paper and was, as I said, new to Canada. And so was really kind of writing about a very long, difficult history. Obviously, colonialism came in a lot to it, and also just all of the really complicated dynamics between the territory and the federal government. And it was kind of it was a big thing to take a bite out of. And so I submitted the paper, and I very much wrote it with my instructor as my audience, because I wasn't really, thinking ahead of that. And so then I submitted it to CPoPP, and obviously was accepted. And I got, I don't want to say harsh, I think I got what was a very appropriate review, in that, I'm a white person from the United States writing about food insecurity and none of it. So there's a lot of layers about how I'm an outsider to this issue. And I just wrote some problematic things in that paper. And so my external review, I had 2 reviewers, and they were very, very detailed, and they just picked out a lot of points in my paper that, like I didn't include enough Inuit voices. I got some of just the governance wrong. So the process of making my paper into what it is now, which is very long, as Dora knows. Part of it was just kind of factual, and I imagine that happens with a lot of papers, right? It's like when you're writing a paper at the end of term, you're kind of just trying to get it out. And Tim talked about this during his talk. If any of you came to the launch, like you're just trying to get the paper to a point where you can submit it. And so when you're going back and reviewing it, it's like, oh, I kind of pulled some stops there that, like I really need to look more into that. And so I feel like I got a lot of support from Dora and Carmela, just kind of like looking into that. Dora had some really good background knowledge in food security, and also kind of in Nunavut. So like just working on the factual stuff, I think is actually a really important part, because you want to put out papers that are factually correct, right? And so hopefully you have external reviewers who are kind of pointing out like, oh, this is wrong, like look into that. But then a lot of it was like, I feel like the other part was just, we really worked on the structure and kind of talking through kind of how I was like structuring and scaffolding my argument. And so that work kind of took place a lot when we would just meet together. And then I think the other really helpful thing that Dora and Carmela did was just ask questions. They would go in and just kind of use the comment section to say like, what about this? Or like, what about that? And so it's partially why my paper ended up so long, because Dora is a very curious person. I like kind of tease her about that, but I think it made my paper a lot better. It really covers all the stops. And let's see, what else did you want me to talk about? Just kind of like what makes a good policy paper. So I think one thing I didn't do in the original draft and that I updated is that I really didn't use a theoretical framework at first. Obviously, like, I don't know, I'm sure I added a few things, like, I don't know. Anyway, I didn't really have a big theoretical framework. And so that's a big thing to add into a paper during an editing process. But like doing that, I think it made my paper a lot stronger. And so just being able to like reference not just subject matter literature, but also like policy scholarship in particular, I think is really important. And then I think like another tricky part, and I don't even know how well I did this, but doing good policy recommendations, I think is kind of, I feel like that's what really kind of lights a policy paper on fire and makes it really interesting. And in some respects, I think it's okay if some of those, I don't know, like I feel like mine were kind of like a little bit going out on a limb. But I think that that's kind of okay. Like, I think it's okay to just be a little creative and like, you've done all of this work to back yourself up all along. And so then to kind of go on a limb and be like, this is what I think should happen, is kind of interesting and fun. So yeah, what else did you want me to talk about, Dora?
I was going to ask if you have any advice or tips for the writing process, or for authors who are maybe considering submitting to the journal or to other publications.
Oh, writing tips. That's a good question. I think this whole process is really about humility and just being okay to get pretty intense feedback on your work. And that's really what makes it so strong. I mean, I didn't say this, but it was such a good experience to do this paper with CPoPP. I got another paper published last year, and like I have to say that the CPoPP process was much more intensive, and I think it really brought along my writing a lot more. But it was very time intensive. So I think if you're considering submitting, just like kind of having a very open mind and being open to kind of changing your product and letting, knowing that your editors have your best, like if you make it kind of a collaborative thing and you're working together on this paper, I think it can really, you'll kind of get more foundational and make, I think, meatier changes. At the same point, it is important, like Dora said, to kind of keep that voice strong. And so it's always okay to say no. And as an editor, like you need to be able to hear no, because it's their paper, right? And so you can't make them do anything. It's just not how it works. So yeah. Oh, and I think like one more piece of advice I have, like, I don't know if any of you have gotten edits back where it's like the person is asking you to make edits that don't feel, they just kind of feel like you changed, like you made a slight wording change and it's just kind of a matter of taste. It's really better to not do stuff like that. Like if you're suggesting a change, it should really be better. And yes, that's like subjective, but if there's any part of you that's like, like the way I want to say it is kind of just kind of the same as the way they were saying it. In the same vein that the writer needs to have a lot of humility, I think the editor needs to kind of have a lot of grace with like, this isn't my paper. And the way that they said it the first time maybe is just as good as the way that I would say it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lauren. I really enjoyed working with you on the paper. I feel like
I enjoyed working with you too. It was so much fun. It was like a really intense group project.
It was. And I feel like I learned a lot too through the process as a senior editor to, like you said, like figure out those moments of like, okay, I think this is something that really needs to change, or like, no, I think, having your voice come through here is great the way you've done it. And, I might have done it a little differently, but again, we're here to support you as the authors. And
yeah, well, and like I would say, Dora, like you and Carmela were both really strong in that aspect because you didn't rewrite it for me. You asked me questions. And so that's why like asking questions is such a good way. You're pulling someone along without being like, you said this wrong.
Yeah, it's true. And I think sometimes it is helpful to ask, what were you thinking behind that when you said that? Because sometimes, the argument is there or the idea is there, and it just does take a little bit of that teasing out.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay, maybe we will open up to questions again. And I'll maybe stop sharing my screen because I feel like some of my Zoom functions are frozen right now. Uh-oh. Oh no, I can't see any of you right now. Jenna, are you able to see people?
Yeah, I can see that Mackenzie has his hand raised.
Okay.
Yeah, so thanks, Lauren, for sharing your experience. Now that you've given your experience of it, I'm a little bit interested in submitting something potentially, but maybe some advice, or maybe a question for you is, I know you've given some advice on the writing process and being humble and taking it kind of with a grain of salt and just, getting through the process. But maybe can you speak towards maybe some advice for people who are looking at submitting something? Is there kind of some things that people should be aware of or people should be thinking of when they submit something? Like, I'm probably going to submit something for Mary Bartram's policy analysis class. And so I'm just like, it was a paper I wrote for a final assignment. And so how do you determine, how do you, I guess, make something that is worth the time of the people who are reviewing it from your perspective?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think if I could go back in time and just tell myself, like, give myself some advice, it's that, like, you have to realize that if you get accepted, this is going to be a very large chunk of your spring semester. It's not just something where you're like, I don't know, putting in a couple hours, it's hours and hours and hours. And so if the paper that you've written is something that you want to dive deeper on, and it's a topic that you're still interested in and think could really be fleshed out more, then that's a really good candidate, I think. So you kind of have to think of it not just like, because it's fun to be published and it's like such an honor. And so I think that that's kind of what you're thinking about when you submit something, like, is this something that would be accepted? I would really recommend is to think more like, is this something that I want to dive deeply into? And like I said, I think if you're kind of still working on a paper or, are thinking if you want to submit something, like, if you don't have that theoretical structuring to it, it might make it a little harder to make it a super, super strong paper. So if you say you're choosing between two, I would choose the one that you're most interested in and that you want to spend a significant amount of time on, but also maybe the one that kind of has more of a theoretical background, because that's going to help you. That's going to just like lead you down a path that will make it like, it's like you have a lot more room to make it stronger, I think, if you do have that theoretical structure to it.
Okay, thank you very much for your advice.
And I would just add on to that, if I can, that I think, there's also all kinds of different policy papers. I would say there's not one way of writing a policy paper. And so I would also suggest that you check out some of the papers that have been published in the past, not just from this past year, but from previous editions as well. You can kind of get a sense that, there's different ways to approach how we talk about policy, how we think through recommendations, and like Lauren mentioned, the theoretical framework behind it, things that you covered in the policy analysis class. So I think, papers submitted for that class are perfect candidates for the journal, because they are really focused on thinking through how we approach policy and that kind of thing. And, if you got feedback on your paper from your prof, if you have time to think about how you might incorporate that before you submit it, you're more than welcome to. But as we talked about already, like, it is a process. And I should preface as well, Lauren's experience is also only one of the authors who is on the journal. So I can't speak to how the others felt about it, but most of them are students, former students in the program. I'm sure they would also be willing, if you wanted to send them a message, to share some of their thoughts on the experience. But based on the launch event that we had last year, I think that folks had a good takeaway from the process. It was, a chance to dive a lot deeper into what they had been working on. But I think a lot of the authors were also very passionate about, what they were researching and working on, and thinking about how this might be a stepping point into something else in your future, whether that's, making connections in the field that you're interested in, or trying to see whether your research is going to have an impact in other ways. I think there's opportunities there, and it is I think it's a good experience even if your paper doesn't get selected. We're going to hopefully still be able to provide some of that feedback to students. So things to think about, and it is a subjective process. So yeah, we try to create those review forms to guide the reviews and add some structure to it, but at the end of the day, it is our peers that are helping to make those selections and the external reviews.